I just want to welcome everybody and thank you for coming to this kind of special edition of our Fair Districts Volunteer Huddle. We are going to have a discussion tonight. Catherine Terser is going to be leading that discussion, and I will leave her to be doing the introduction. And so really, we are just, we have come through this fairly traumatic experience. I think we're all a bit traumatized by what happened in the past, year and a half. And more than a year and a half at this point. And we want to know what is a better way to redistrict. And in order to have that conversation, we have invited somebody who is a member of the California Independent Redistricting Commission to talk with us. So I'm actually going to stop sharing my screen, and I'm going to ask Catherine to go ahead and introduce our visitor, our speaker, and then I will highlight their videos so that we can just hear their, look at them while we're having the conversation.
All right. So this is funny. When I asked Patricia how she wanted me to introduce her, she said, "Oh, I can introduce myself." And with that, Patricia, tell us a little bit about yourself. We're just, so excited to have you as a guest and to, pick your brain and get to know a little bit more about the California Independent Redistricting Commission.
Well, thank you for having me. First I want you to please consider me an ally, not a guest, and this is just, whatever I can do to help you all. You all, in many ways, are our heroes because we got to benefit from a lot of individuals like yourselves working really hard to make sure that, that our ballot measures, we had 2 different ballot measures passed. We had, the first one was just on the state legislative pieces, and that was because they knew that the battle would be with congressional members. And then when that passed, everybody else, then it became easy to pass one to do the congressional maps as well. And as we like to tell people, Nancy Pelosi was against our redistricting process, and Arnold Schwarzenegger, who was a Republican governor at the time, was for it. So it is a bipartisan, there is opportunity to build that bipartisan strength. So my name is Patricia Sinai, or Patricia Sinai, and I like to tell the story of 3rd grade. As the family folklore goes, I came running home and said, "Mommy, Mommy, Mommy, I know what I'm going to be when I grow up." And my mom was like, "Okay, what are you going to be?" And I said, "I'm going to be the first female president of the United States." It's sad that in this day and age, that still would be a miracle. But anyway, or a possibility, I should say, not a miracle. But, and so my mom didn't know if to tell me the truth or not. And the truth was I couldn't be president of the United States because I wasn't born in the United States. I was born in Mexico. And then she quickly went on to say, "And honey, you can't be president in Mexico either, because in Mexico, your mother needs to be, and your father need to be born in Mexico." And my mom was born in Peru and my dad was born in Argentina. So when my dad came home, I'm like, "Papi, Papi, Papi, life's not fair. I can't be the president of the United States." And my dad said, "Yeah, I get you. Growing up, I couldn't be president of Argentina either because the Constitution said you had to be Catholic and I was Jewish." So I like to think that that was the seed that was planted for me to really try to figure out how to make democracy inclusive. And I have been working on democracy and been a volunteer, done all the things, going through college. And then after I was a political science international relations major, my first few years out of college, I was in Washington, D.C., and I've just been promoting democracy, civic engagement, especially for those who voice isn't heard.
All right. Well, now that we've learned a little bit more about you, I will highlight that the first time I paid any attention to politics was when Nixon resigned. And strangely enough, I was on my way to the White House that same day because we were doing a tour. And so, yes, that was my first ooh, corruption. Ooh, yes. And I've often thought that's how I ended up, for example, running the Money in Politics project and continuing this kind of work. As people are listening to this, I want you to think about what it was that got you thinking about paying attention to redistricting, what got you interested in politics, and perhaps the possible politics and the personal politics, and then what's happened at the State House. Okay, so I'm ready with a question.
All right.
So you mentioned that California voters approved the reforms, and so these were citizen initiatives. So what year did that happen, and why do you think you were able to pass those reforms?
Well, the first one, I'm trying to make sure I have it right. The first one was done in 2008, I believe. So our first Citizen Redistricting Commission was in 2010. And I think the first one was 2008, and then the next one was 2010. And the first one was a wide coalition of advocates, very similar to all of you. I remember when they were both on the ballot. I taught public service at UC San Diego, and I would always invite the League of Women Voters to come and speak to my classes, because I figured if they got the bug, they would keep being engaged. And I remember my students and I having a conversation about it and being like, this sounds like a good idea. So little did I know I would be applying and be on the commission later. And then the second one, I think, passed. The first one was a little more contentious. And there's others from Common Cause and League of Women Voters in California who can tell you the story much better than I. But the second one, I think, passed because it was like, wait, if we're going to do it for one, why not do it for the other? And it just gained more momentum.
Yeah, so one of the things I remember from 2005, and many of you will remember working on Reform Ohio Now, our effort failed. Our redistricting reform effort of that year failed, and so did the other ballot measures. But California also lost that year. And so we, there was some consolation in knowing, first of all, that we both were up against it and it was hard. And also it was so great to see a state kind of continue and actually manage to pass it. So you have been an inspiration to us there, California, I have to say. So this brings up another question. So why is it you decided to apply to be on the California Independent Redistricting Commission?
Yeah, so just going back, one of my colleagues always likes to say, probably one of the reasons that it all did pass was California politics was a mess. We were recalling a governor, and then to many of our surprise, we did vote in Arnold Schwarzenegger. We're like, wait, really? We're going to have a governor? And he ended up doing some really great things. But I think that was part of it too. It just felt broken. And so I know sometimes when things feel broken, and I know the redistricting feels broken for you all in Ohio, that's sometimes the best time to rally the troops and move forward. So I just did want to share that. Why did I decide to do this? I'll be completely honest, up until this day, I still stop and take a deep breath and go, wow, I'm on that commission. We finished the maps and I'm still in shock that I got on. I was looking for something to do. I had been appointed to our local school board. I lost my reelection campaign. And I was just like, I wanted to serve in some way. I'm a nonprofit consultant, a philanthropic consultant, so I'm very engaged in our communities. I know San Diego and Orange County, Southern California really well. So I thought, hey, why not throw my hat into the ring? And the process, you want me to talk a little about the process?
Sure, go for it. Please tell us about the process.
So the beginning was easy. It was just like a little form that you just checked a few things, and it was just to confirm that you were a registered voter and that you lived in California and you were eligible. And 22,000 people completed that form. And then from there—
Did you say 22,000?
22,000 people said they were interested in redistricting. Now,
so I'm not completely surprised because of just the outpouring and how active folks have been here too, but 22,000, that's amazing.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm sorry to interrupt you.
Yeah, so in a state of 40 million, but yeah, 22,000 said they were interested. And then came the real application, what I like to call the graduate school application. It was 5 essay questions, 3 letters of recommendations. They didn't ask for financials yet. Conflict of interest, yes. And then that number went from 22,000 to 2,000 and something. And then there was 3 members of the state auditor's office, a Republican, a Democrat, and a Republican, who went through all of these applications, and that was all that they were given to do for the year. It was a year-long process. They cut us down to, they kept cutting the number down by 50%, basically. When we got to about 120, I'm like, ooh, I might actually get this, and then they asked for our financials, and then we started, if we wanted to, we could start getting people from the community to give public comment. And it could be positive or negative. Luckily, mine were positive. But some people did start giving negative comments. And then we had an interview process at 120. That group got 60, then 60 went to the legislature. And always it was equal amount of Democrats, Republicans, and the other parties. And then finally, when the legislature got to knock some folks out, and I forgot the number of rules, like I think the Republicans get 8 or something like that. And so we ended up with 35 that went to into a what's it called, bingo ball, kind of like the lottery. It was literally a lottery with bingo ball.
Okay,
And they
all right.
had the Republican ones, the Democrat ones, and the other political parties, and they did it live and they pulled out numbers. I was not in those first 8 that were selected. So and no Latinos were in the first 8 that was selected. So that was
Oh,
our
that's
big
interesting, because that was my kind of next question, was like, how are they encouraging diversity?
So all the way through the process, it came up in the questions that they asked, and then the 3 auditors who were reviewing the applications worked really hard on that. The other piece I didn't share was that during the interview process, it happened right when COVID shut down everything. So half the people were interviewed in person, and then the rest of us had to figure out, it was a 90-minute interview, how to use Zoom. Now it doesn't seem like a big deal, but at the time it was. We didn't know about backgrounds on cleaning up my office and all those things. And so, that was the first big controversy. No Latinos were selected in the first 8. So those 8 then had to select the final 6. And at that point, selected.
And they select them from the pool that's already in the bingo.
That's already
container.
been vetted.
Okay.
Yeah. So it's from the vetted group, and they need to, and then we had there was a total of 14. We just had that conversation, right? It was a total of 14. It was 5 Democrats, 5 Republicans, and 4 from not of those 2 parties. And ours ended up being 4 no party preference. And then when we vote, this was kind of important too, because people are like, well, don't you want an odd number? When we voted, it was a lot of times we did supermajority, so it had to be 3, 3, and 3 to pass.
Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah.
So it's interesting. I noticed Jeff Weiss, who's from Cincinnati and was actually one of the winners of the Fair Districts mapping competition, had a question kind of about kind of partisan makeup. So the reason we worry about it is, like, all you have to do to be an independent here is just not vote in the primary. So you could be a fairly, shall we say, rabid Democrat or Republican, and you just not participate in the primary and you end up being an independent. And so we kind of wondered how it works for the selection of those folks that are independent.
So it was complex in that they looked at our voting record for the past several elections. So that was also a barrier for some, because if you were really young, you hadn't voted 3 different elections, and I don't remember if it was presidential elections or which elections. I'm sorry, I don't have all the details, but trust me, it's all on our website. I'm kind of glad I'm starting to forget details. So that's how they judge. And again, we weren't looking for independence in that final pool. That final pool could include no party preference, which would be or the independent party. We have the independent party, Green Party, or Libertarian. So it was all others who weren't from the top 2 parties. So that's the other thing. The way it's written doesn't say Democrat, Republican. It says the number 1 party that has a majority, and then the second party. And that has added some questions for us in California because more people are not of the two parties than from the Republican Party. And so some people are like, well, no party preference should be the third party. I'm like, but it's not a party. And so we're kind of going through that debate right now and just wondering if it makes more sense to do 5, 5, and 5. And so it would be a total of 15. And then when you do the the majority vote where it's 3, 3, and 3, it's a little fair because if not, you have to get 3 out of 4 people to vote.
Okay, and so like if the Whigs came back and all of a sudden they were the dominant party, that would change who it wouldn't be a Democrat, Republican, other, it would be the Whigs, blah, blah, blah. I don't know.
Yeah, it's important to
Okay.
remember when you're creating a constitutional amendment, it's for life, it's for a long
Yes,
time.
no, yes.
And so you constantly need to think in those terminology, in those terms, and also pull yourself out of what's today, the reality of what's stressing you out today, but what is your vision of what you want in long term? Someone had asked in the question, yes, we
Oh, go ahead.
definitely knew our political preference. Yeah, we were out. Yeah, it was the first time I did something politically where I could just say what my political preference was. We always knew, but people watching us said that they would have not guessed what our political preference was. We really learned how to work together and stay on the common vision. And we would tease each other sometimes when the camera wasn't off. We might say something or whatever, but on the whole, it was something that strengthened us. And some of the ways that we bonded would be we had subcommittees and we could only have 2 people per subcommittee, which didn't really work that well. But it was because of our Bagley-Keene laws, which are the laws of how many people in elected or other positions can be together. And it's for transparency purposes. And we would always make sure it was a Republican and a Democrat. And we would also make sure that they were from different parts of the state. As much as I joke that the picture in my background is California, that's only a small piece of California. It's on the coast. We have a lot of rural areas. It's a huge state. And so it was constantly trying to bring in all those different perspectives.
Now, what kinds of subcommittees did you have?
Oh, we loved subcommittees. So I started the Education, Outreach, and Engagement Subcommittee, and the education piece was really about educating ourselves as commissioners. Outreach was outreach to all the different stakeholders, but also to the general public. So sometimes we needed to use stakeholders to get to the general public, but sometimes we wanted to just get to the general public without that intermediary. There was pros and cons on that. And then engagement was engagement through the whole process. So anything from, submitting your communities of interest. We were really big on communities of interest, to calling in and knowing that the process was happening.
All right, I wanted to take a little bit of a step back because you talked about the kind of vetting process, but one of the things I did wonder, are there rules prohibiting certain people from being on the citizen commission? Like how does that work, and who's prohibited?
So I don't have all of them in front of me, but basically it was no one who had either served or worked for a state legislature or congressional office for the past 10 years, I think.
Okay.
Prior 10, so it was okay that I was on the school board. That didn't preclude me. And another commissioner had also been elected on a school board. But if I would have been on our state assembly or state senate or congressional member, then I couldn't have, or worked for any of them. And I believe that you couldn't be even part of the political party as well. I think staffers from any political parties. The other one that surprises people even more is we're not allowed to run for office for the next 10 years. And that includes school boards and city councils. And so I love it, because the funny thing is most of us did get asked to run for office right after it ended. We all joke around that, we purposely were like, yes, we can't, sorry. But the idea was some places like Los Angeles that people go to Sacramento and then go back to Los Angeles to run for city council or mayor. And so even though that doesn't happen in most cities in the state, they kept having kind of LA as what do we want to keep from happening?
So one of the things that I wondered about is this kind of general, we're in this process of thinking about what we want to do next. And
Mhm.
so I know that you've looked at other states as well as being part of this commission. Do you have a sense for what would make sense when selecting commissioners, and is there a number of commissioners that you actually think is a good balance between enough for diversity versus enough, too few or too many, what have you been thinking about that question?
So, as I said, I'm a nonprofit and philanthropic consultant, and I always fall on boards. 15 is a good number, and so I know that we have 40 million people in the state, but I think if you get bigger than 15, it gets unwieldy, and the bigger it gets, the larger the number has to be to have quorum and things like that, but also more people can hide too, and so I like that they chose a number that was near 15. The story goes that they looked at 13, but someone thought it was unlucky, and so they went to 14. And we're just thinking that 15 might make sense. So we're still having those conversations. That's what we're doing now. I do want to say, I forgot to say at the beginning that I'm here as a volunteer today, that I'm not using any California taxpayer dollars to be with you. And the things that made our process work, I think, is that we're absolutely independent from the legislature. The only time the legislature got a say was at that small pool that they got to strike a certain number. Unfortunately, that is done in private, so we don't know why they struck those folks. And we would love, we keep joking, that's one of the things that we're talking about, is for us to change anything about the commission, we would have to take it to the legislature or to the public. And we're like, there's no way the state legislature is going to say, yes, we'll do this piece in public. But that's the only piece of everything we've done that's not public. The other thing was we have 6 criteria that we have to follow in order. And you kept hearing them over and over again, and it became very common. And that was just part of who we were. And I think that part is really important. And I also think the application process, thinking about what questions to ask and who's going to vet it. I think one of the questions that I would probably pose to you all and is where does this live? Where does the commission live? We live by ourselves, right? We're independent, but the state auditor was in charge of selecting us and all that. And then once they selected us, it was like, see ya. And it was like, oh, we had kind of staff, and we had to figure everything out right away, which was okay for us because we ended up with 18 months to do this work because of the census delay. But for the commission before us, they only had 4 months or something to do the work. And it's like, how do you hire people and hire mappers and learn everything you need to learn? And.
Well, it's so interesting because, one of the things I'd wondered about, and I'm sure many of us have, was there training provided to you all before you assumed the job?
There was training when we assumed the job. So the first 8 got certain amount of training, and I remember watching them just because I was like, well, this isn't fair. They're getting trained, but whoever's coming on later isn't. So I kind of watched it, and also, I was watching to see if they were selecting me or not. But so they got trained so that they would know what they should be looking for.
Mhm.
There was some training that the auditors received, and if applicants wanted it, they could look at that. And then when we first started, we had a 10-day meeting, and it was like drinking from a fire hose, right? It was just almost too much. And so we broke down some of those trainings again and brought them back. Part of the education working group that I was on was we brought the different members from the community, from different parts of California, because we all know our own communities, but and I really strongly encourage any coalition to keep thinking who's not at the table and bringing their voices in. Because for us, people think California ends at Sacramento, but there's still a whole third of a state. And it's very rural and very different than any other part. And so it was constantly thinking about who's at the table, who's not, and bringing those voices in. So we invited different people to the table to kind of educate us. And that's how I believe we got to the definition of fair and representative maps.
And so what's interesting to me was something that you said earlier, which is like all of a sudden you had to run it without the auditor's office providing any help. Can you tell me a little bit about those early days and what kind of choices you made, at the beginning? And did you set up rules, or like, how did that work?
Well, what's hard is there's a lot of rules already because it's a state entity. And so there's bureaucracy. And then luckily we had one person who was a bureaucrat in the state on the commission and could help us. They did give us 2 retired annuitants, which are individuals who work for the state who have retired. And both of them had been involved in the 2010 redistricting commission. So they had some information. And so they were able to help us with that piece. And then we broke, you asked how many subcommittees. I said we had a lot, and then I didn't tell you a number. We probably had at one point 13, and we still make them. We still, because we do a lot of the work outside of the meetings. And so we still create them. So we had a subcommittee who hired the executive director, and we had an issue where the auditors thought they were being helpful by putting out the job description for the executive director, and the community thought that that wasn't fair, that we needed to be able to review the job description and all that before we put it out there. And we didn't change. We didn't know how to change the job description. And same with legal counsel. And one of the things we're doing I'm now on the transition subcommittee, and we're hoping to have some things in place, like update all the database as much as we can with new contact information. If there's new technologies, kind of figure out which ones might be helpful so the commission's ready to go. We're still trying to define a lot of those pieces. And I think one of the areas was database. How do you create a database for all the community input you're getting? And it took us longer than we thought to have that database kind of up and running. But if you have a chance to go on our website and play around with the community of interest database, it is just fascinating. So we had almost 40,000 pieces of input. Oops, you're on mute.
I had a very noisy kitty cat, so I was like, I went on mute for a minute. Anyway, so for many of us, we kind of were like, okay, well, what about the funding? So one of the questions is like, what was there language about funding in the citizen initiative? And then questions like, did the commissioners get paid? What kind of time commitment? How much money was spent for what sounds like a rather elaborate, you're talking about 18 months, is that correct? Like this kind of long-term project, how much money was spent and how did, can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah. I'm not a numbers person, so I don't remember the exact.
Well, and you don't have it's just giving us a sense.
I would say, so the first time in 2010, they realized quickly that they did not have enough money to do everything they wanted. The philanthropy community in California put about $1.5 million into the outreach. So they funded nonprofits like you all to help with recruitment of commissioners, outreach, and engagement. The commission in 2010 then asked the legislature to give our commission 1.5 million, I think, or $1 million for outreach. And then we learned we couldn't make grants and stuff. So it was like, we're like, okay, how are we going to use this money? And so we had to get creative on that. And then you have 2 sets of budgets. So you have your budgets to do the maps And then you have your budgets, post maps for in case you get sued. And so we needed to think about those two. And the interesting thing is the second pot of money is about the same or bigger than the first pot of money, because that's how much it costs if, legally you get sued. We are, I think, the first commission that has not been sued. So we were really excited that the window passed and we hadn't been sued. So we're the first commission to vote on our maps unanimously. English is my second language. And the first one not to get legally challenged.
So this is the thing that I kind of wonder about, what are the roles for politicians in the process? Did folks come and testify? Were you worried about any of the commissioners' close relationships with their political parties?
Yeah. Well, I don't know if it helped because it was COVID. So we weren't going anywhere. I kept joking that I was happy I wasn't out and about because, my kids, my state assembly member goes to the same school with my kids. And, it's your county, San Diego is a big county, but it can be a small town sometimes.
Mm-hmm.
And I think we were all pretty good when people tried to reach out to us individually, pushing them back out we had a process created where they had to send everything to the same email address and then it was put into our database. We did have that conversation at the very beginning because the Democrat Party, parties were starting to ask us to do presentations. So we as commissioners went out into the community and had a PowerPoint presentation that we were doing. And we said, obviously the political parties are interested in this process and we should go there because those are the people who are civically involved. Within like a week or two, I was like, wait, but we have no the Republicans aren't reaching out. And so we actually reached out, me and my new outreach person, because it changed. He and I went and we talked to the Republican Party and then we talked to the Chamber of Commerce. And, so we were constantly saying who are we talking to and who are we not, and bringing in different people at different times. We did have that conversation about politicians. And we said, look, if a politician is doing a town hall meeting and they want us to come in and do outreach, do our presentation, we'll do it. Because again, we want to get the message out to the community. And that politician is a citizen of California. And so they have it's okay. And so we got very comfortable early on. We talked about it saying they're allowed to send us. Well, hopefully they'll tell us, but everything could be anonymous. And we definitely had politicians who called in or they got other people to call in or submit there. And sometimes we'd be like, okay, this is getting political and we called it out like, okay. People said I didn't have a good poker face, people knew right away what I was thinking.
So I was a little interested in kind of the negotiating, did you have rules for negotiating? How did that work?
Yeah, so we started the process with communities of interest, which was really about you tell us who is it that you work, live, play, pray, protest, learn with. What does that community look like? Who do you want to be represented with? And who do you not want to be represented with and why? We did have software so that allowed people to do that work. We also created paper tools and we got into the incarcerated individuals. Were able to fill out the tool as well. So we really tried every niche and cranny to get out there. And for how do we engage, that part was interesting. We did create.
Oh, you're muted. It was from above.
So we created a mapping playbook and we went through it with a fine, just all of us agreeing, yes, this is how we're going to engage. We agree. And it was so funny because I went back to read it, and when you're in the middle of it, you don't necessarily always remember what you all agreed to
of course.
do. And we also had rotating chairs. So we did it after, yeah, it changed when we would rotate them, but it was pretty consistent. And once we were in the actual map drawing section, it was every week we changed. And so the chair really would have had to know the mapping playbook really well and call it. When it did come time to do the lines, we were in the same room, most of us. We did have someone who had long-term COVID and she couldn't join us. So she was always online. And but that was helpful because we could kind of like look at each other, or be like, hey, wait, it's my turn to speak or whatnot. And there were times when we were frustrated. It was like, wait, we've already talked about this and we're going back to it, or we would forget. So that's one of our lessons learned, is if there's a way to capture why we made the original line to begin with. So when we come back, we can measure what the public's saying now versus what the public said before and why we made the line the first time. Because you kind of, sometimes it felt like we were doing the last voice in was what we were hearing. We'd have to go back and try to figure out the whole story.
Well, and I know people are really interested in the public hearings. One of the things I always wonder is, what do you feel like you learned that, at public hearings that you would not have gotten just looking at census data? And how did it inform your decision making?
I am a firm believer that census data is, by the time you get it, it's already dated, and it's not always accurate, and it's only numbers. And so why the public hearings were so important and all public input was they put the face to the numbers. And when I applied to be on the redistricting commission, that's what I said was my strength, was to put a face to the numbers, know the stories, bring them in. And so the public hearings were really about that. They were virtual hearings, so it made it easier in many ways. So people, would have a time slot, an hour time slot that they would stand in line to speak versus having to sit through it 8 hours. We did 182 presentations at the beginning of the education session. I have my numbers with me, so I've not memorized this, but it was 7,000 people we reached that way. And then we had 35 meetings during the community of interest piece where people could call in, and we did it by region. So we did break up the state into different regions, and we did everything in two. So a Republican and a Democrat were in charge of the different regions, just so that we could do the outreach as well as pay attention when the input came in.
And how did it work for the independents? How were they included?
Sorry, it was independent, Republican, and Democrat. So we always mixed all of us. You couldn't have two Republicans or two independents, and we always mixed Northern California, Southern California. And we tried to do male and female mixture as well. All those things, it sounds tedious, but is what built the team, because we all got to work with each other one-on-one on different things. In the end, people sometimes don't know how to participate until we actually started drawing the maps. And so unfortunately, if they would have submitted communities of interest, we could draw better draft maps, but people didn't, that part was confusing to them. And we were doing all of that before the census data. I love that part because it allowed us to kind of imagine. I called it our imagination piece. And then once the census data came, we were able to start putting the communities of interest with the census data. And then people started calling in, and we got about 17,000 submissions at that point. We also had a point where individual advocacy groups submitted they could submit either a county map or a whole state map. It could be state assembly, state senate. We did 4 sets of maps. So state assembly, state senate, Board of Equalization, they do our taxes, and congressional. And so we had kind of the Latino led one, the Asian, the Black, and then sometimes they agreed and sometimes they didn't agree, the LGBT map. And we would be like, wait, these don't agree with each other. And they would call in and say, okay, now we're looking at it. Yes, we're okay with that change. So it was very interactive. People sat and watched us, which I cannot imagine watching us all that time.
Now, what were the kinds of things that you found to be sticking points?
Some of it was when, like, San Diego County, I know really well. And so sometimes sticking points were when one community was saying, oh, this is where our community is. And you're like, that's not necessarily where that community, that's a diverse area. And so at some point, the community groups, the advocate groups, kind of switch from advocating for where their communities were, and that's how we're supposed to draw the map, to
Mhm.
what would help their favored candidate win an election. And
I
so,
see. Yes,
and-
yes.
so and that was something that it didn't click to me what was happening until like later I'd look back and go, wait a second, now I get what you were doing. And so that was really tough about, wait, you all, these advocacy groups, you all stakeholders set a lot of these parameters so that we couldn't look at candidates there or potential candidates and how they can win. But you all now are advocating in that way. And so that part was complicated sometimes. To me, it was a sticking point. I have one other sticking point that I think is important for you all to think about. Is this whole idea of how do you look at ethnic and racial minority communities? And the Supreme Court, has told us you have to use jingles, and that it's a whole complicated thing, so I won't get into it. But you can use race and ethnicity if it has to do with a VRA district, a Voter Rights Act district, but you can't. You have to balance how much you're looking into race and ethnicity when creating districts. And that part was kind of a dance that we were trying to figure out. And that's where the census data doesn't always help. And sometimes you want to hear from others. And one of my favorite examples was this one group trained their youth on independent redistricting. And they sent us a report that highlighted, it was Oakland. And if you've been to Oakland, it's one of our more diverse cities in California, in the Bay Area. And they said where the supermarkets were, the faith-based organizations were, where the beauty parlors and barbershops were. And it was a way to tell us, hey, these are this is where the Black community is, this is where the Asian community is, and it was really brilliant the way they did it without saying it, because you can look at the economic interest or define communities in other ways.
Well, that's wonderful. Now, there's some people that are like brass tacks. How did the map actually turn out in terms of Democrats, Republicans, etc.? What was the final outcome of those districts?
Yeah, so it's really funny because people will be very straightforward. People will talk about competitiveness, and should competitive be one of your criteria? It was not one of our criteria. Arizona, it is one of their criteria. So a commissioner from Arizona and I talked about this. I said, I'll be honest, I haven't thought about competitiveness, but my thought is if you make that a criteria, you're going to focus on exactly what you're talking about. How many Republicans, how many Democrats, and is the map fair will be based on that, the brass tacks, as you're saying, which to me, that does not represent a fair map. So some people will say, look, there's 47% Democrats, 25% Republicans, and all the rest, but the maps didn't fall that way. And I don't know what the percentages are because we never looked at it that way. We were more looking at it as community and how many, what percentage is Latino, what percentage is African American, what percentage is women, what percentage is rural versus urban. There's so many ways to look at it that we are really proud of our maps, because we had more districts than last time that are VRA districts, that are voter rights districts, and that are minority majority districts. We didn't necessarily, we couldn't create minority majority districts. We did, at the time, we knew we were bringing communities together that were similar, but we weren't saying, okay, we're going to make this a minority majority district. So that's how we were measuring it.
Yeah, that does bring up the Voting Rights Act. How did you navigate that? And I've always been kind of interested in why it is commissioners go into private session when they're having these conversations? Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, so someone had asked if everything was done in public. Yes. Almost everything except when we had to go into closed session. And closed session was potential litigation. That was the word I was looking for, not being sued, but litigation, potential litigation, and personnel issues. Voter Rights Act is considered potential litigation because any conversations we have can end up being brought into a lawsuit, right? And so having a closed session allows us to ask questions and look at the data under a attorney-client privilege.
And so there are times that you do go into closed session throughout this.
Sometimes we
this
go
makes
into
me-
closed session, like we start asking a question and all of a sudden you'll see our legal counsel go, closed session, closed session, closed session.
Well, and this leads to this, like the process of selecting the experts to be the guy or gal to say closed session. How did you determine the best experts? How did that work? And how did you pick the people that were advisors?
So our 3 months into this, we fired our executive director. Well, we no longer had our executive director and our legal counsel. It was definitely it wasn't a good fit. And so we had to go back to the drawing board. And at that point, we had a better idea of what we wanted. Our first executive director was the same executive director from 2010. And so for some commissioners, that felt very comfortable. Okay, that person will know what to do. Let's go with it. But it ended up, we bumped heads too much because we wanted to be different than 2010. We didn't always want to hear what 2010 did.
Yeah, of course.
And the legal pieces, the person we hired legally was someone who you want to hire someone who understands state legal laws. It doesn't necessarily need to be redistricting laws. So it's someone who's keeping you on the straight and narrow based on, for us, it was Bagley-Keene or whatever laws you have to follow as a state commission. And then
so like the open meetings law, that kind of stuff.
Yeah, exactly. Okay. And then we hired once we had that legal counsel, they helped us hire the firm that would help us on the redistricting questions. And then that firm hired the VRA expert who would do the voter, racial polarizing data. And then for the mappers, we are pretty lucky because we had the same mappers as 2010. We used the same mappers. The Karen and her team, Karen McDonald is known to be a mapper throughout the United States, but she also heads up the legislature started a database kind of at UC Berkeley, and she heads that up with it, has all the information, all the data that you need to do a lot of different, that's where the census data is kept. And so she kind of works all year round. And then when redistricting comes up, she's doing double duty, her and her team. So I think it's hard. I mean, I've said when we're doing our lessons learned document, I've said we don't really necessarily want to share lessons learned, but we want to identify what questions the group wants to be asking themselves. And
okay, well, what are the kinds of questions the group should ask themselves?
When you're hiring, I think it's that constant question of how much do you want to be independent from the 2010, or for us, it'll be the 2020, and how much do you want 2020 commission to come and help you all or learn from the 2020? And that was a really big question that we never, we kind of kept going back and forth, but we never had that actual conversation. So I think that was an important one.
Well, my guess is we are coming close to the end, and I know all of the questions have not been asked. The one thing I just wanted to close out with is, like, what kind of advice would you give to states like Ohio that are considering an independent redistricting commission? Any parting words?
Do it. Just look at the city of Los Angeles right now and everything that's just exploded in Los Angeles to really understand why an independent redistricting commission is needed. Ironically, with everything that came up with the racial slurs, and it was more than racial slurs. But one of the things that came up yesterday was a motion to create an independent redistricting commission. LA had been fighting it for so long, the city of LA, the county of LA does it. And so like I said, we had chaos in California, and that's how they slipped in the independent redistricting commission. You guys had chaos during your redistricting process. So think about that as not frustration, but actually the spark that'll make it all come together. And sometimes, you need that chaos to create something new.
Well, I just wanted to say thank you so much. I'm sorry to everybody that we didn't get to all the questions. I tried to interweave them as much as possible. With that, I think we hand it back to Mia, who's going to tell us about some kind of upcoming events. And she wants to tell you about our new website as well. And Fair Districts has a beautiful new website. So Mia.
Hi, yes, thank you so much. That was so fascinating, and people want more. So we will definitely look into, there was a suggestion to have folks from another state with independent commission, and we'll look into that. We'll also look through the chat and make sure that we try to, answer some of the other questions if we possibly can that are there. So I just wanted to show you a couple of things really quickly. Lisa Worm has kind of redone our website, and we've got some new information on there. And, we encourage you to go to our website and check it out. We've got that very cool redistricting timeline is on there that kind of tells you everything that happened. Another quick website that I want to tell you a little bit about. Oh, actually, Catherine, do you want to just tell about the Moore v. Harper that's coming up, the webinar?
Oh, I just wanted to highlight that on October 18th, we are going to have a webinar on Moore v. Harper. And what's nice about this is it was really the brainchild of folks from North Carolina. So they've been doing these kind of in-person events to talk about the potential impact of the so-called independent legislature theory. And so they've traveled up north in this case virtually. And so I'll be participating in it. Other folks, Kayla from All Voting is Local, she'll also be participating. But really the main people will be the people that are arguing the Moore v. Harper case. So I think it should be both detailed and give us an understanding about how, a decision could impact, elections, federal elections across the country, and how it could impact our reform efforts. And I think it's worth participating and attending and getting to know a little bit more information. If you can't attend, what we're hoping to do is get a recording, and we'll be sure to share that with our redistricting friends. Jay, I'm glad to see you're here from the Redistricting Network. Do you want to say a few words? Do you have anything upcoming that people should know about?
I don't know if I had anything prepared, but I just wanted to thank you guys for having me, and I look forward to your next meeting.
Awesome. Thank you so much. I have one more website I want to share, and this is kind of Catherine's brainchild. And we were talking about, it's something impacting our elections. Well, another thing that impacts our elections is dark money that comes in. So Common Cause and our allies on the Ohio Fair Courts Alliance have built a website, and the entire purpose of the website is to explain what dark money is, talk about the candidates in relation to our current Ohio Supreme Court races. So we have not only information about the court and why we should care, and the important cases that are coming up, about the candidates, about how to how to learn about candidates, you know, not just from ads, what dark money is, how to follow dark money, what the history of dark money has been in Ohio. But we also have, we are actually uploading, we're giving information about how to find, you know, the source of money in those ads. And then we have links to individual ads that are coming up, and we're going to be adding them every day. I'm going to be adding another one that just came out, you know, tomorrow morning. And as the ads come out, we not only show you, have an opportunity to watch the ad with the ad text, we say who paid for it, what the background is, and then we have some analysis from, you know, an expert who, you know, has something, you know, to say about the impact of that ad. We're also keeping kind of a running list of media about dark money and impact on the Ohio Supreme Court races. And we have more information about dark money and in general and Ohio specifically. So we really encourage you to check out that new website, judgetheads.org. And I think, wow, bingo, it is exactly 7 o'clock. Thanks to everybody for attending. And thank you particularly to Catherine and Patricia. That was incredibly interesting and informative. And, you know, I hope it makes us want to keep going on our journey towards fair maps. And with that, I will say good evening and thank you to everybody.
Thank you, everybody. Happy first day of early vote.
Yes.
Thank you all.
Thank you, Patricia.
Thank you so much. Very
See y'all
much
soon.
appreciated. Yeah. Bye-bye.